Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of the Daily Fix. I am your usual host and presenter, Advocate Tulohoyani. It was another day of shocks in the Pretoria High Court. This time we heard how Gwabeni was virtually abducted, assaulted in a most brutal manner, until at some stage he almost lost consciousness. We also heard from Gwabeni himself how at a later stage the police took him to what he thought was the magistrate's court, or the magistrate's court in fact, where instead of taking him before a magistrate, he had to enter the building. He was made to enter the building from behind and left in some waiting room. While he was waiting in that waiting room, expecting that he would be ushered or taken into court, Gwabeni says an amount of 2,000 rands was demanded from him by one of the policemen there, Buthelezi. Gwabeni relays the sad story of how, because he did not have the money and he did not even have airtime to call his brother, he had to use a cell phone borrowed to him by some of the people who were in and around the magistrate's court, and he made that call to his brother and ended up securing the 2,000 rands that was demanded by the police, specifically policeman Buthelezi. So after he had secured that money, he was then released. And that was the end of the story. Criminality in motion, crime in motion. If anything, the MEYIWA investigation was never going to yield the suspects that killed MEYIWA if it was being conducted in the manner that Gwabeni tells us it was being conducted. So the police were on a frolic of their own. In fact, we see them here. If Gwabeni's evidence is anything to go by, acting anything but like the police, involved in extortion, because that demand of 2,000 rand from the police to Gwabeni was an act of extortion, because this comes just on the back or soon after the assaults that were meted out to Gwabeni to send a message to him that we are in control here. So after he had been made to roll on the ground like a drum full of water, he says, kicked, and all the other things that they did to him, the ultimate thing was now to demand an amount of 2,000 rand from him. And of course, the man under those circumstances really had no other option. He had just seen too much, and all that he wanted was his freedom. So he ended up parting with that money, money which in the first place he did not have, money that came from his brother. So this shows you that this was a rogue investigation pursued by rogue policemen. To this day, Kwabeni doesn't know what happened to that 2,000 rand. Kwabeni was never arrested ever again, if we can call this an arrest. Because as far as I'm concerned, this is an abduction that leads to that crime also of extortion. No legal processes were followed here. No formal charges were ever laid against Kwabeni. And Kwabeni never appeared before any magistrate in connection with the killing of Senzo MEYIWA. But at some stage, it would appear that the police, pardon my language, were hell-bent to get him to be some kind of witness, some kind of, made for television witness. Because that is not how witnesses are secured in an investigation. They wanted to turn him into some made for television witness to testify in the case unfolding in the Pretoria High Court against the 5 accused persons. That is indeed regrettable. But this is what we have come to expect from the South African police services. Sometimes, following that trial in the Pretoria High Court, one does not miss the Matanga Commission proceedings. We are seeing here corruption being exposed for what it is. And it is really sad to see all this because the MEYIWA family, up to this day, 11 years later, are still looking for justice for Senzo MEYIWA. So if Docket 636 has identified the real killers of Senzo MEYIWA that sit in that courtroom, or that have sat in that courtroom day in and day out for the last 3 years or so, if that Docket 636 had the real suspects or culprits, why was it necessary? Why was it at all necessary to go through all this business of wrongfully arresting first Zamkuhle Mbatha? Now here comes another victim of the police. Need we say more? Thank you for watching and have a wonderful, wonderful evening.